everyone to our special live in conversation with the lovely Australian author Monica McInerney, who is here to tell us all about her new book, The Godmothers, which is already in the top 10 bestseller list. Isn't that fantastic? There will be an opportunity for everybody to ask questions, and you can pop them in the chat, and Monica will endeavour to answer them as much as she can towards the end of the event. Hello, Monica, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Hi, Janine, and hello, everybody. So much for spending your Friday evening with Janine and I, and my big thanks to Courtney behind the scenes, who is making it all happen. So a big hello from Adelaide to all of you in Melbourne, and my heart's been going out to you these last months, and I hope you're all doing as well as possible. We're thinking of you and cheering you on.
Yeah. Now, let me introduce you properly. Monica grew up in the Clare Valley of South Australia and is the author of 13 books and celebrates 20 years of being a published author. She usually divides her time between Australia and Ireland, where she lives when there is not a global pandemic. She writes about love, grief, secrets, lies, the ties and tensions between siblings, and the links between generations. Congratulations, Monica, on the launch of The Godmothers.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been such a topsy-turvy year.
Oh,
there it is. Oh, I've got one too. We can go snap.
There it is.
Thank you. And Penguin, my beautiful publishers, kindly made me this lovely banner for my online events, because you can hide a multitude behind a banner. So I'm glad to say that. So thank you. Yeah, it's been such a topsy-turvy year for so many people in the whole world, of course. But it has been a year of celebration for me, with the 20th year of being published, and now my new book. So I'm looking for silver linings everywhere I can.
Look, I'm fortunate enough to have already read it. Absolutely loved it. And the experience I get when I read any of your books, Monica, is like putting on my tracksuit, getting a cup of coffee, putting on my mockies or my Ugg boots, and just settling in. It's so comfortable. They're that good. They make you feel good when you read them.
Oh, well, that is beautiful to hear, Janine. Thank you very much, because everything I do as a writer is because I'm a big, big reader. I still read. I started reading when I was 4. I still read 2 or 3 books a week. And in fact, everybody listening, Janine just told me that this year she has read 73 books so far. So there is a silver lining to being at home in lots of ways. But that's so lovely to hear, because that's what I love when I'm reading a book, to feel like I'm immersed in that whole world and I'm meeting all the characters and living their lives. So if that's how you feel, that's terrific. Thank you.
And look, for anyone who may have been living under a rock or doesn't know, can you tell all of our audience basically what Godmothers is all about?
I would love to. Thank you. It's the story of 3 best friends, Olivia and Maxie and their friend Jeannie. And they meet at boarding school, and they become very firm friends. And then as they get older, it becomes clear that Jeannie is quite a tricky customer. And Jeannie falls pregnant quite young and has a daughter called Eliza. And Jeannie is a troubled personality, and she's got difficult mental health issues, and she's developing addiction issues. And the tragic event happens quite early on in The Godmothers, and Eliza is left on her own, but thank God with her 2 godmothers on either side. And the story becomes, I think, really a family mystery. As time passes, Eliza begins to ask very serious questions about the father that she's never met, and also the truth about her troubled mother's life. So she's all these questions that she's pushed down. She decides she wants the answers to them, and she decides to connect with her godmothers in order to help find those answers. But the question of the book is, are they helping her find the answers, or are they hindering? So it's a book of a family mystery, as I said. It's a book packed with secrets and lies and truths, and it's also a book packed with moral dilemmas, and as the godmothers try and decide how much of what they know should they share with Eliza. So that's in a nutshell, I think.
Oh, that's good. And what was your inspiration behind The Godmothers? And do you think the role of a godmother is still relevant?
The inspiration really came down to a long time fascination I've had with family secrets. I love writing about families. Most of my 13 books involve families in one way or the other, because I love the comedy and the drama of family life. I love the fact that you learn about all human behaviour under the family roof. And it doesn't matter whether, I've written about very small families, like in this book, it's only Eliza and her mum, Jeannie. I've written about big families in my novel, those Faraday girls, or, three sisters in the Alphabet Sisters, all these different family relationships. And the way that an event can make all sorts of different things happen. People react in different ways. And what I do in my novels is I set off what I call an emotional explosion, some big event that's going to send the characters flying around, sometimes literally to other sides of the world, or upset them in different ways. But what really interests me is the secrets that are kept between generations and why they are. And two family stories of mine, that there was a mysterious family secret in my family, that an aunt that I never knew because she died 8 years before I was born. But I grew up hearing that she had drowned in an underground water tank on the family farm. But there was always that suspicion that there was more to it than that for me. I would hear older generation, my aunts and uncles and my dad talking about it. But if we came into the room, they'd stop, or they'd talk in hushed tones. And as a little kid, I was very conscious that there was more to it than I was ever told. And I was never told more. I still don't know the answer, but I have that suspicion. So I think that always stayed in my imagination. And then more recently, my big sister Maria, who lives in Melbourne, a friend of hers gave her as a special birthday present a bound collection of all the emails and letters that they'd written to each other during really action-packed years of their friendship. And in it, they discuss their families, their friends, their boyfriends at the time, now their husbands. And my sister has asked her husband that if anything ever happens to her, the first thing he has to do is destroy that book, so that her kids never read, all her siblings never read all these secrets but from their friendship. And those two events, but none of those appear in the Godmothers, but they just lodged in my imagination. And I thought the idea of friendship and knowing each other's lives, but what do you tell the next generation? And then what if it's a big secret? What if it's a really important secret that could cause damage if other people hear about it? So that was the inspiration. And then it began, with the three friends. And then I thought, what if? It's all those what if questions you ask as an author.
Yeah, and I mean the role of a godmother too. Back in the day, it used to be that because I'm a godmother.
You're great. Yeah.
You had to look after the spiritual well-being of your godchild. But I think that's sort of changed a little bit now.
I think so too, Janine. I'm a godmother to two. I've got a goddaughter, one of my nieces, and a godson, a little French boy called Paul, who's the son of an old Australian friend of mine and her French husband. And I only had a godmother. I didn't have a godfather because my godmother was very religious and my parents felt that she could do the job of two, if you like. But I agree. I think there's not a religious connotation with it as much anymore. It certainly was a Catholic tradition, and I grew up in a big Irish Australian Catholic family. But more and more, I did a lot of research and reading about godmothers and the role and friends and, younger people. And because a lot of us don't live close to our blood family anymore, we all move around so much more. But there's still that need to grow a community of people who care about your child as much as, or as much as possible as you do. And godparents are becoming very, very common again. And sometimes there's more than one. I mean, celebrities, I think Elton John, he and his husbands, they have about 15 godparents, I think, for their children. But I know lots of people, and it means a lot to them to be asked to be godmother or godfather, because it's not like a friend or an aunt or an uncle. It's a chosen role. It's you matter to me, and I want you to matter to my child. So I do think it's an important role still.
And I think it puts the parents at ease to think that if anything ever happened to their child, there'd be someone there who would keep an eye on them.
I think so too. And that certainly was what went into the writing of the Godmothers, because, tragically, and this isn't a spoiler, we'll be careful tonight to avoid spoilers, everybody. But in the first chapter, Eliza is left alone. She's the daughter of a single mother, and she is at the age of 17, finds herself alone. So her godmothers are very important to her.
Oh, that's good. Now, it's set in different locations around the world, and it was lovely to see that part of it was set in Melbourne.
Yes, I love Melbourne. I lived in Melbourne for 5 years. from about the age of 22 to 28, and I met my gorgeous Irish husband in Melbourne when he was working in a newspaper there. So if I didn't already love Melbourne, I would love it especially. And I'd go there a lot with my sister. I have two sisters living there, and travel around. And I've set lots of my books. Actually, one of my books is set in Castlemaine in Victoria, and yeah, I think Upside Down, Inside Out is set in Melbourne. So I do a lot of books set in Melbourne. I love it. And it was a great place to start this one on a stinking hot March day is when the action really starts. And that didn't take much research because I can still remember those stinking hot Melbourne March days.
Yes. In fact, our summer seems to be running later than it used to now.
Yeah.
It can go almost up till Easter, depending on what time of the year Easter is as well. But some of the other locations you set in the novel have historical elements too. Gretna Green, can you tell us a little bit about that?
I can, of course. So the book is set exactly as you said, Janine. So it's set in Melbourne in Victoria, and then it moves to Edinburgh in Scotland, and then also Gretna Green in Scotland and the Highlands. And it's also set in London and in parts of Ireland. And I've got some photos actually, which I love a bit of show and tell. So if anybody has read The Godmothers, or if you're about to read The Godmothers, one of Eliza's godmothers, Olivia, lives and works in a beautiful artistic boutique hotel in Edinburgh. So when I went to Edinburgh first last year in 2019 with my husband to do a research trip, I wandered around until I found the street where I wanted to set my fictional hotel. And then I was back in January this year with my 18-year-old Australian niece, Ruby, from Melbourne. And we went back to all the settings. And I hope you can see that as I'm holding that up. So this is the street in Edinburgh where, if you're reading The Godmothers, this is where I imagine the Hotel the Montgomery is situated. So it's an area called Haymarket in Edinburgh, and it's beautiful stone terraced houses, as you can see. And so that's me in front of exactly the street that hotel is allegedly made up. Then there's a wedding in The Godmothers very early on that Olivia and Maxie and Eliza are all involved with. And I went to Gretna Green, which is the famous eloping village on the borders of Scotland. It's in Scotland, but it's very close to the English border. And it's famous from, if you've read Jane Austen, a lot of early English fiction, couples were always running off to Gretna Green to elope and get married. And to this day, it is still a famous wedding place. So I had 2 days in Gretna Green wandering around, and it's like a wedding theme park. It's the most peculiar place because there are just couples walking around, sometimes very small wedding parties, sometimes, they've got a few friends with them because people marry quickly and easily and simply there, a bit like Las Vegas, but, in a Scottish village. So we were fascinated watching it. So just, you're having dinner in the hotel one night and there's just bridal couples dotted all around the table. So that was funny. And then there's also the tradition is that when somebody is pronounced, man and wife, or wife and wife, or man and man at Gretna Green, that the celebrant picks up a hammer and clangs this anvil, the famous Gretna Green anvil, and that denotes that you're married. So I watched a few weddings. In fact, I joined a tour group that I thought, this is fascinating. I was just wandering around, and he was a tour group, and they were explaining, what was happening, and everybody was really dressed up. I thought, gosh, this tour group have really taken it seriously, that they're going to, really reenact the wedding. So I followed them into one of the little rooms. There's a few different rooms, and got very interested and, started taking photos. So this would be really helpful for my research for my wedding in the book. And then they started kind of looking over and giving me these funny glances. And one of them came over and said, "Excuse me, madam, but this is actually a private wedding." And it wasn't a tour group, it was an actual wedding that I got far too interested in. My husband was outside going, "What? Stop doing that." But it was so, I really did see a real wedding at Gretna Green. So that's the anvil. And will I show my other research photos, Janine, while we're talking about locations? There's also a section set in London. Eliza's other godmother, Maxie, is quite a famous television actress. She's a dramatic actress in a series like Prime Suspect, like a kind of a crime series that so she's quite well known. And so Eliza goes down to London for reasons connected with one of her other godmothers. And while she's there, she goes to the Tate Gallery because years ago her mother had backpacked around London. And again, this isn't spoils, but there's a painting that her mother had seen in the Tate Gallery that's really important to Eliza and her mum. And I went to the Tate Gallery on my first research trip last year, and then I went again in January this year. And I chose the painting. I had the Tate Gallery is this enormous, beautiful. It's probably one of Europe's most beautiful and famous art galleries. And I went in there knowing I was just going to choose a painting that would matter to the characters, but I didn't know which one it was. I deliberately didn't research it beforehand. But I walked in one room to another, and it's just enormous. And I came around a corner, and I saw this painting, and it just leapt out at me. And that's me standing beside it, so you can see how enormous it is. And it's called Carnation Lily, Lily Rose, and it's by an American artist called John Singer Sargent. And I'll put that up, and hopefully everybody can see that. And so it's two little girls in a summer garden, and the artist has done this beautiful work with blush pink and light to make it look like those lanterns they're holding are really aglow. And I just thought it was beautiful, and I thought that's going to be my special painting. And I was particularly thrilled because I thought I'd never heard of that painter. I thought, brilliant, I've found a real rare jewel in the Tate collection that I can shine my light on in the book, until I stepped out into the gallery shop. And there was an entire wall of Carnation Lily, Lily Rose souvenirs. And it turns out it's one of the Tate's most famous and most loved paintings. I did buy tea towels, tote bags, umbrellas, coasters, sunglasses case, earrings, a necklace, a scarf, So if anybody follows me on Facebook, and I hope you do, I have a really active and enthusiastic book loving community. I'm going to do some giveaways pretty soon because I bought too many souvenirs. And one final painting, just while we're on locations. I can't say where this is because I don't want to give anything away of the plot, but this is in Ireland, and it's a beautiful castle in Ireland, and that's me in front of it on my research trip as well. So if you're reading the book and you get to that section, that's just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So that's some of my location research.
That's lovely. Now, you cover a lot of topics in the book, especially the relationship between mothers, daughters, friends and family. Also step-parenting, same-sex relationships, and you even touch on dementia and mental health, but you do it in such a tasteful way.
Thank you.
Which character in The Godmothers did you enjoy writing the most?
Which characters? I enjoyed them all. I write kind of big, complicated books about big, complicated people and relationships, and all of those themes that you mentioned, Janine, are in the novel, because it's a very emotional book. I think it was a very emotional book to write because it was about mothers and daughters, and I think it's actually a book about longing, in that a lot of the characters in the novel are longing for something that they've lost in some way, or they're longing for something that they've never had but they wished they'd had. And I want my novels to feel that you're sitting down when in your mockies or your tracksuit pants or whatever, that you feel like you're meeting real people, that you're a fly on the wall in their lives. And everybody I know in the world has complicated, emotional, sometimes beautiful, joyful lives, sometimes really difficult lives. And I want to make my characters have all those layers that they are going, they've had joyful times sometimes, but they're also going through the difficulties that life throws up at us all. And so each of the characters has a lot going on for them. Eliza, who's she's the lead character, broke my heart to write because I'm very lucky. I've been stranded by COVID since February. I've been here for 8 months unexpectedly and haven't seen my husband for that long. But I've had the joy of living with my 81-year-old mother, who I would never have thought I'd get this incredible, unexpected 8 months with. And for me, the idea of not having my mother around, I lost my father in 2000, and our family is still mourning, his great loss. But so to write Eliza was, I cared for her so much because I thought, imagine what that is like to have had that life that you've had. But I also cheered her on because she's made of strong stuff, Eliza. She has built herself this safe little life as a reaction to the drama and the great loss of her mother. But the book is about her taking on the world again. And so I cheered her on. I loved writing that. I loved her godmothers. I felt very fond of what they brought to her. But there's also lots of side characters in the novel, and there are two characters, and I'll just talk about them briefly. One of them, in the boutique hotel that Olivia, the godmother, runs, she has the guest from hell. staying there. And she is a woman in her 80s, and she is vicious-tongued. She's foul-mouthed. She is the most selfish character I have ever written. She does not care about anybody, and she does not get her comeuppance. Sometimes people do in real life, but sometimes people get away with the most appalling behaviour. And this character, Celine, is one of those people. And she is Olivia's, not mother-in-law, she's Olivia's husband's first wife's mother. So she's like a mother-in-law outlaw, and she's a piece of work. And I can't tell you how much fun she was to write. Like when I got the idea for her, I thought, what if there was like because I love writing about complicated, messy families. And I thought, what if there's like this kind of outlier, if you like, who's really causing havoc? And Eliza thinks she's going over to kind of chase her own, family history and find out who her father is and find out more about her mother. But she finds herself, having to deal with this woman. So Celine's a horrible person, but she was enormously great fun to write. And then my secret favourite is an 11-year-old Australian boy called Sullivan. And Eliza meets him when she's on the plane flying over from Melbourne to Edinburgh. And he's an unaccompanied minor travelling from Melbourne, where his mother lives, to have some time with his father. His parents are divorced. And he's precocious in a gorgeous way. He's 11 going on 111. He's very interested in everything and very earnest and very, very articulate. And he was such a joy to write. And
it's fairly lonely too.
He's a lonely little boy, and he and Eliza recognise something in each other. Loneliness sees loneliness, and he becomes really important to her because he's going to Edinburgh too. So he kind of attaches himself, and he was an unexpected character for me too, but just so much fun to write. And in fact, I ended up writing about 50,000 extra words with just Celine and Sullivan, which I had to cut out because they were threatening to take over. And I actually think I might write either a novella or a book with Sullivan. I'm really interested in him, and I think 11-year-old boys are great fun too. So it's a long answer to a great question.
That's for sure.
Thank you.
Now, I believe that you started your writing career with writing short stories. Can you tell us about your pathway to becoming a published author?
I'd love to, surely. I did start, as I said, everything I do as a writer is because I'm a reader. So I was a reader. I worked in all sorts of different industries during my 20s and 30s. Actually, my first job out of school was on the Here's Humphrey TV show, which people might remember from Humphrey B. Bear, the bear in the tartan waistcoat. And I was wardrobe girl on that program, and then became a script writer. And people are always very rude about when I say that, because Humphrey famously doesn't wear pants. So everyone thought, well, sorry, you weren't that good at your job. And then I started. Exactly. So they were saying, well, what kind of scripts did you have to write? So, but there were obviously scripts. And so that was my first kind of writing job. I got that job straight after I'd finished year 12 in South Australia. I was supposed to go to uni and do an arts degree, but I took a gap year, and then I got this job, and I did never end up studying arts or writing. I worked in lots of different jobs. I worked in the music industry. I worked in public relations. I worked in publishing for 10 years, behind the scenes, working with authors like Roald Dahl, Tim Winton, Toni Morrison. I met all sorts of amazing authors. And that's when I was living in Melbourne. And then I moved to Tasmania in 1996 with my husband when he got a job down there. And I wasn't working in publishing, and I missed it. I missed being around stories and talking to authors and talking about books. And it really was this kind of like an ache in me. But it got me thinking, maybe if I started writing stories, I might get that feeling back of being around stories. And I had a beautiful boss in the public relations firm I was working in pretty much as a writing journalist. And I said, could I borrow the work laptop? Because this is 25 years ago. And she said, yeah, sure. And I took it home and I wrote a short story. I had this glimmer of an idea, and I wrote a short story, and I can still remember how I felt when I finished writing it. It was just this kind of awe not at the story. The story was not good, the first draft, but I love writing it. I had written a piece of fiction, and the next night I said, can I borrow it again? I wrote another one. And it was as if all these stories and ideas had been building up in me. And all the time that I've been working with authors and working in children's television and working in all this music industry, I've been gathering bits of material, because I describe writers as walking compost bins, because everything that happens to us goes inside us and it mulches away. And like I said earlier, the two family stories for me that, became the godmothers, that they planted those seeds. They're from years ago, but they stay in you, you know, as a writer, or as a human being. But, you know, that's what writers draw on. And I just kept writing the short stories, and they were pouring out of me. And I reckon I wrote about 50 short stories in a couple of months. I tried thrillers, I tried literary fiction, I tried children's stories, I tried romantic comedies, I tried all sorts of different stories. I started sending them out, hoping that they might get published. Back they all came, rejected. And back then, in the ancient times, you used to have to send them off in a stamped self-addressed envelope, so that you know, they didn't have to pay the postage when they sent it back to you. So I'd come back home from work, and there'd be an envelope in my mailbox, and it was as if I'd rejected myself, because it was in my own handwriting. So I started writing it with my left hand, the labels, so that it didn't look like my own handwriting. But I didn't care that I was being rejected. I'd gone to my local library. I love libraries. My mum was a librarian. I used to spend, so I'd gone to my local library, and I'd borrowed a book saying how to get published and how to write short stories, and all, just read everything I could. And one of them had this great advice. They said, just keep your hopes up. Always have another short story ready to go. So when your rejection comes, you send that one out the next day. So you're always hopeful. And it was such good advice. So I did that. I was like a flight controller. I knew where the short stories were zipping all around. And after it took a year and all these rejections, but I didn't care, because I was having so much fun writing. And back they'd come, and I'd read it and go, yeah, I can see that there was something wrong. So the next one I'd try a little bit, try something else. Now I see it was like an audition process for me. It was like me finding my own voice. Because eventually, I got 3 accepted by Australian magazines for publication in the space of 2 weeks. Wow. And this was like, I couldn't believe it. And each of those had something in common. They had a family background. They had dialogue, lots of dialogue, and kind of a bit of fun, snappy dialogue, a twist in the tale, and a hopeful ending. And as I said, a lot of humour. And that's when I realised, I think that's what my voice is. I'd read about how do you find your voice, and because they were the editors had seen something in those stories, and that was my start. So that gave me the confidence to start writing my first novel, and that's now, that got published 20 years ago. So it was a long apprenticeship for me, and it's lovely. Thank you for asking, because if anybody's watching and is interested in how do you get started? You get started by writing and writing and writing and taking risks and just, enjoying it, really. So yeah, it was a long route, but it was a great thing. So when I started writing my first novel, I just had so much fun, because I'd done so much practice before, I think.
So do you think working on the other side, being a publicist, do you think that helped or hindered, or?
I think anything helps. Anything to do with books helps. But it doesn't mean that you have to have been a publicist to be a published writer. What matters to being a writer is being a reader. You have to be a reader. I know I've got a lot of great writer friends, and the thing we all have in common, we all write lots of different genres. We've got very different writing processes. What we all have in common is we live, eat and breathe books, and we swap books, and we talk books, and we talk stories, and we talk, different techniques. In terms of me being a publicist, I was for 10 years, as I said, working with those authors. And for me, that was like doing a writing course by osmosis, in that I got to sit in on so many interviews with authors. I got to travel with a lot of them, like on the road, doing book tours and things, and be able to talk to them, just over dinner or in the plane or, traveling. And without realising it, because that was before I knew that what I wanted to do was be a writer, or could I even be a writer. But I took it all in without realising, and I discovered, looking back, that what they all had in common, and again, this was very different writers writing very different sorts of books, but they were disciplined, and they were passionate, and they cared about their stories. And they were the 3 lessons that I took. It wasn't about grammar. It wasn't about sentence construction or, chapter breakdowns and all of that kind of thing. The only way to do that is to work it out for yourself. But I knew when I set off on my, writing path, that I had to take it seriously, and I have ever since. And also, having been a publicist, with lots of other authors, I'm a very well-behaved author, because I know what it's like not to, because they're not always. So I'm probably a goody two-shoes, because I know how batty I can be.
That's right. And I've said to patrons, like, I really cherish the books that I've got that have been signed by an author.
Yeah.
And as I've said to people, you authors are like rock stars to us. Readers. You really are. You know, we just think you're so great. And to get, you know, a little bit of you, even if it's only a signature, you know, and I really treasure them. I think God knows what will happen when I die. My kids will probably throw everything out, but I don't care. They just mean so much to me. And, you know, as a reader, we appreciate
our donation.
So
that's beautiful. Well, I'm the same. As I said, I've got signed copies from all the authors that I worked with, and they have a very, like, my husband and I are both big readers, and we've got a house full of books. It looks like we've got beds in a library, to be honest. But and I've got several shelves of all the signed copies that I've got, and also from writer friends now. And I agree. Like, it feels like the authors touched this book. That matters to me. And I go to, like, I've been going to a lot of Zoom events since I've been here, because I'm in Adelaide, but I've been able to go to Zoom events in Sydney and Melbourne, like we all are tonight. And I love hearing about other authors talk about how they work, because I learn something from every single one. And I go to a lot of readings and writing events in Dublin, where I live too, and I go to the Writers' Week in Adelaide or Melbourne or Sydney, whenever I can. And I get quite starstruck, actually, when I'm lining up to get my book signed. I kind of get all nervous. But so I know how you feel. Like, I've been on both sides, but it's it's special. It's a special thing, I reckon.
Yep. Now, 20 years you've been a published author. Is there something in that 20 years that really stands out as being your best moment?
Best moment. I have lots of really favourite moments. My favourite overall, every single year, and still is talking to readers, meeting people like, everybody that's watching tonight, people who care about books. The book community is such a beautiful community. We're passionate readers. We climb inside the books that we all read, and the beautiful thing is that people climb inside my books, and I get a lot of contact from my readers when I go on book tours, and when it was possible, and if this hadn't happened, I would have been there in person with all of you tonight. Yeah. But next time I hope. And so that's been a really beautiful thing. I've got to go on book tours right around the world, and in America and Italy and Hong Kong and all sorts of places in Ireland and Australia as well. And that's meant the world to actually hear people say that your books mattered to me, or they entertained me, or they kept me occupied, or whatever my books brought. So that's the number one thing, just to have readers. But there's been funny little things that happen along the way. For example, I was in Dublin one morning, and my mum rang, and you think, oh God, is something wrong? And I said, everything all right? She said, no, everything's great, but I'm just doing the quiz. There's a 20-question quiz in the Advertiser every Saturday. And I said, I'm just stuck on one question. I'm wondering if you can help. I go, oh, sure, if you want me to. And she said, yeah, it's question 7. And the question is, who wrote the 2007 novel, Those Faraday Girls? And it was me.
So she was having a piece of you, obviously.
She sure was. She completely was. And she was just there that morning, and she'd been really amused to see that. So I've been a quiz question. So that was, really fun. And then another time I wrote a book called The House of Memories, and which mattered to me a lot. It's a very, very emotional book, and very sad, but very, very funny. Hopefully, I tried to make it so. And that was published in 2008. And then in 2018, maybe 17, I suddenly started getting all these messages on my Facebook page, my very active Facebook page, saying, quick, turn on the television. And I was in Australia at the time. And Channel 7, quick, Home and Away, quick. And there was a character in Home and Away in hospital, a character called Maggie, reading The House of Memories in her hospital bed. And that was so good. I had no idea that was going to happen. And so I watched it, over. It was just so great. And then I went back to Ireland the next month, and Ireland's a month behind with Home and Away. So I got to see it on Irish TV as well. So little things that you never expect. But as I said, readers, seeing it on library shelves, seeing my books on library shelves and in bookshops, that's still the number one. That's a gorgeous feeling.
And it's great that you've been able to tour America too, because it is so hard for an Australian author to get a go in America, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And in fact, that was a few years ago, and my most recent books haven't been published in America because they're turning more to American writers, and as they should. I think everybody goes through each country goes through kind of themes and things. But it was very interesting, and really interesting to meet and talk to American audiences. And one of the interesting things is that when I was talking once about how I get my American editions, and because the spelling has been changed, or the American versions of spelling, and I was talking about this in a bookshop in Chicago, and this woman came on and said, "Sorry, what do you mean American spelling?" And I said, "Well, you spell things differently than we do, like harbour, and you do use different words like pavement and footpath and diaper and nappy and all that." And this woman had absolutely no idea that that was the case. And it became this really, really great conversation with this group of people about that kind of cultural differences between countries, and that the books change. And that had been quite a battle that I'd done, actually. That was one of my books, that the Americans wanted to change all of my Australian terms, my American editors. So it was those Faraday girls, and so they were talking about changing the baby Maggie in that book, changing her diaper, and that she was walking down Hobart down the pavement, and I got the first proof pages back, and I kind of thought, but this is an Australian story. She's not walking down a pavement, she's walking down a footpath. And I was new to being published in America, and I thought, I don't know how much I can ask, like you have to be, you have to be polite, obviously, and I wanted to be, but I said, look, can I ask, please, that it stays Australian? It's a really Australian family that I'm writing about. And I had a really good editor, and she had to push back a lot against her bosses. But sure enough, they kept as many Australian terms as they could. And I was so thrilled. But it came back to bite me, Janine, because I got my first review of those Faraday girls. And that's really nerve-wracking when you get your first review and, the people like it, because you're so nervous. And, I spend a lot of time and pour my heart and soul into my books. And I got this review, and I was reading it, and they said, it's 4 stars. I thought, well, 4 out of 5, that's great, but I wonder what they didn't like. So I was reading it, reading through the review, and they, really liked the sisters and this big twist that happens in the middle of that book and that. And they said, I would have given it 5 stars out of 5, but there are all these terms that I didn't understand.
Yes, Americans love Australians.
They do, but they like their own.
Yeah, I've always wanted to go there, but it's so far away.
Yeah.
Because over there don't even leave their own state, let alone the country.
That was it. And I think that's what I discovered much more. Australians travel so much more outside their own country than Americans do. But it's been such an interesting experience to go to different countries and meet people. But because I write about families, because I write as much drama and comedy as I can. And families are the same the world over. We all have the same issues: grief, love, loss, rivalries, secrets. So I think that's why my books have been able to be translated into those different languages.
Oh, that's good. And do you think it gets any easier for you to write now that you've got all those books behind you?
No, I think it gets harder. Because I want to try more with every novel I write. I want to be better with every book that I write. I'm still learning. Like, as I said, I'm still reading my head off, and with each book, and sometimes I read books and go, how did they do that? How did that author do it? And I'll read it a second time to learn, so I'd like to, do that, like changing lots of different viewpoints, because like I've been writing, solidly for 25 years and published for 20 years now. And technically I'm learning still all the time, and I want to go deeper, and I want to make them, what I'm hearing a lot about the Godmothers is that people can't put it down, that they're reading it in a day. And that is so beautiful to hear, even though I would say, please, it took me 18 months to write. Can you take a month to read it? But what that tells me is I've done my job, and I'm really happy to hear that, because what that means is that the people want to turn the page to find out what happens next. And and that's what I feel that's what my role as a storyteller is to, kind of, you almost say, come in close and I'll tell you a story, and then this happened, and then this happened. And if you want to find out what happens next, then I'm thrilled about that. Yeah, but that takes, like, I do 10, 15 drafts of my books to make them easy to read, so that you feel that, you're just in the story as quick as you can. And I wouldn't have it any other way, because I want them to be as smooth as silk, that you just feel that you sink into that story.
How long does it take you on average to write a book?
About 18 months.
Wow.
Normally. There was a gap between my last book, The Truth of a Lifetime, and this one, because, in fact, I had spent 2 years working on another book, and I had got to 200,000 words. And then when I finished writing that book, Normally what happens is I do loads of drafts, and I don't show anybody. I don't talk about my books when I'm working on them. I'm very private and keep them very close to me. And then normally what happens, my first two readers are my husband, John, and my younger sister, Maura. He's a journalist and a big reader. She's a fantastic writer and editor and reader. And they've always been the first people to read my novels. And but with this one, the one I'm talking about now, I read it back and I thought, this book isn't for anybody else but for me. It had been a very sad time for my Irish family. I'd lost my my beloved brother-in-law, and then my father-in-law and my mother-in-law. So I was writing it during a very, very sad time. And as I said earlier, all my books come out of me. That's why they're emotional. They're the things that I care about or I'm thinking about. And because I write about all the big issues that happen in families, and I was living it. And I think all of that sadness had gone into the book I was writing. And I read it and I thought, no, I needed to write that book, but nobody else ever needs to read it. And so I started again. And I was lucky. My publishers and agents were really understanding. They said, that's really brave of you. And I said, no, it's not actually brave. It's the only thing. I had to write it, but it's not, it's not to be read. But it taught me so much, Janine, about creativity, about what writing is for sometimes. Sometimes writing is just for writing. It's for expressing feelings. It's for
it was your way of feeling something.
It was exactly. And I still know I made the right decision. I learned a lot writing that book that never was. As I said, nobody still has ever read it. It's on my desktop back at home in Dublin. But I learned so much about writing that when I got the new idea for the Godmothers, it was like I took off on a jet plane. I knew exactly what I was doing because I had got rid of lots of very sad feelings. Well, not got rid of them. I still felt them, but I had worked through them. And so the Godmothers was a very different writing experience. And I've like a lot of people have found during lockdown, painting or writing poetry or writing or journals or anything has helped us all get through this really difficult time for our world. And me as a writer, I had to write for myself, not just for the publication.
Now, you describe yourself too as being a very superstitious writer.
Yes, I am.
Tell us a bit more about that.
I start collecting things when I'm a writer. When I write each of my books, and my book, The House of Memories, has a family, for example, called the Fox. The surname is the Fox. And during the writing of The House of Memories, I started collecting foxes, and my desk was full of foxes. When I was writing, I was writing Hello from the Gillespies, which is about a round robin letter, and coincidentally, the lead character, Angela Gillespie, who writes this, the Christmas letter from hell, it's too truthful and it goes viral. But she has a thing about robins. So she's English and grew up with little, the robins with little robin redbreast. So I started collecting those. And during the writing of the Godmothers, Sullivan, the little boy I mentioned, the little Australian boy, he has a thing about ring-tailed lemurs, those gorgeous creatures from Madagascar. And so I decided I'd start collecting ring-tailed lemurs. But turns out they're actually quite hard to find. And like foxes are everywhere, robins are everywhere in design and graphic. But I did find, and this is a photo of my desk while I was writing the Godmothers. Goodness. So you can see there's one of my leftover foxes from when I was writing The House of Memories. I'm actually working on I'm writing my first children's book series. The first book's coming out in April with Penguin, and it's called Marcy Gill and the Caravan Park Cat, and it has a gorgeous black cat in it. So I've started collecting black cats there too. But here are my 9 ring-tailed lemurs that kept me company throughout the writing of the Godmothers. And as I sent it off each day, so I'd email it to myself so I wouldn't lose it, I would touch everybody on the head. I developed this kind of ritual. And it was a lovely ritual. It was the way I finished working each day. But if you can see them, they're the most, and I've gone to every zoo I go to. I spend a lot of time in the ring-tailed lemur enclosure. And I've just discovered here in Adelaide, and Adelaide Zoo is open because we're so lucky here. But they have a lemur experience, which I'm booking into with my sister next week. And for 15 minutes, I can apparently sit there with fruit in my hands and they'll climb over me.
Oh, my goodness.
So I can't wait. So that'll be like my dreams come true.
Oh, that's great. Oh, we'll wonder what your inspiration will be for your next novel. Are you writing?
Exactly.
You've got thoughts for your next book?
Yeah, I have. I spend about 6 months imagining it before I start physically writing, and I often actually do that imagining when I'm on a book tour because usually I'm doing a lot of travel and sitting in cars, and I have just done about 10 events around South Australia, which were possible here,
Yep.
which included lots of driving and just basically staring out at the landscape. And my nephew travelled with me because my gorgeous publicist Bella is in lockdown in Melbourne, so she couldn't travel with me as usually happens. So my nephew stepped in. And he got very used. He said, he's a Sherlock Holmes fan. He said, you're off to your mind palace. And he knew that I was imagining, what the next book. So yeah, when I get back to Dublin, I'm going to straight up to my attic and where I write and get cracking on the next adult book.
Oh, that's great. Now, you did touch on it a minute ago. I believe you're writing for a different age group.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
I'd love to, because I'm absolutely loving it. It's for age 10 and under, and it's a children's book series, and it's a chapter book. And the first one, as I said, is finished, called Master Guild and the Caravan Park Cat. And I've seen early cover drafts, and one of the wonderful things about it is I'm working with an illustrator for the first time. So not only am I learning how to write for kids, and it's hard. I've written 13 books, well, more than 13, because the one that got rejected, but by myself. But it's really it's a whole new skill, and I read a lot of children's books anyway because I love the genre, and I'm loving that. I'm loving learning how to write in a different way. There's no messing around. You've got to get straight into the story. Like I have the luxury with my adult novels to give backstory, to to weave in other plots. Mm-hmm. And I'm learning a whole new way of writing, and I'm loving it. So that'll be out in April with these beautiful illustrations and by an illustrator called Danny Snell, and then 2 more books in the series as well. So my head's full of those ideas too.
Definitely make sure we've got those in our collection. That's
I hope everybody's kids will enjoy them. I've had such they're family stories, they're set in a caravan park with a slightly alternative family, and but it's got magic in it, and the fun of putting magic in a story. I want to put magic in my adult novels now because you can just make all sorts of things happen. So
that's right. Now, also, Monica, we have a lot of writing groups at the library too. What would be some of your tips that you would give any aspiring writers out there?
I've got 3 tips, Janine, that I always love to give, and they're very simple. My first tip is read. My second tip is write, and my third tip is edit. And it's that simple. Read, read, read. Read as much as you can. Read as a reader and then read as a writer. So if a story is really captivating you, work out why. Why do you care about that character? What has the writer done? So you learn from every single book that you read. As I said, I've never done a writing course. I've learned, my writing courses have been author talks like me tonight and all the author talks I go to. And every book I read, I learn something about writing from. The second one has said, write. To be a writer, you have to write. You write every day. I'm really disciplined when I'm working on my novels. I write about 2,000 words every day. When I'm doing the first big draft of, I don't plot my books out in advance. I know my characters. I know the big event that I'm going to throw into their midst. And that's when I start writing. But I turn up at my desk every day and I make sure I write 2,000 words. And all the writers I know who are published, that's what they do as well. And it can be easy to be distracted by research or something like that. But if you set yourself lots of little goals along the way, that will hold you steady. And then the third one, as I said, is edit. Never be discouraged that you've written something and go, oh, that's just terrible. Nobody's ever going to want to read that. Because you've written something and now you can make it better. And then you can make it better still. And as I said, I do at least 10 to 15 drafts of each of my novels before anybody else reads it. Because you're creating something out of nothing. You're creating a whole fictional world with people and settings and dialogue. How can you possibly get that right first time? It's an ongoing process. So, yeah, read, write, and edit.
Great advice. Great advice. Now, how have you been launching a book in a pandemic? I mean, it's a 1 in 100 year occasion. You'll probably never have to go through this again. God help us all. But in a way, I suppose it's been great, but it's been different.
That's the only way to look at it, really. I mean, we're living through history in a way that none of us ever expected we will, and we don't know what the ending is. And we're, human beings, we don't like uncertainty. I am used to planning things. When I came out in March, expecting, I was going to see my mum and my family, have a week of meetings with my publishers, planning my big October book tour, and everything turned upside down for everybody, though. Not, I mean, my situation in that I haven't been able to see my beautiful husband, but, we've been able to talk every day, and I've still been able to do, like Zoom events like this. I was not good technologically at the start of this. I thought, how am I going to do a video one? And now I'm getting it. Like, thank God, Courtney, your colleague, was able to help me tonight. But, all the things that we're doing now as a result of COVID, that I hope we'll bring some of that with us. So it's just been and the other beautiful thing is, I mean, as you said yourself, Janine, you've read 73 books. A lot of people are reading lots. Yeah. I've been thrilled with the reception. I mean, Godmother's has only been out about 2 weeks, but I've had such a beautiful reception to it, and thankfully it's gone into the top 10, and people are sending me beautiful comments. And in a way, we've all got more time to read too.
That's right.
I've been out there looking for every silver lining I can find.
Yeah.
Really.
Oh, absolutely. And what have you been reading? And what are you reading at the moment? Can you recommend something to us?
Yeah, I'd love to recommend some to you. I've been going mad for Australian fiction. So I would love to recommend a really good thriller called The Bluffs by Kyle Perry, who's a debut Tasmanian author. So The Bluffs by Kyle Perry, and a really good book by a Sydney writer called Benjamin Stevenson, and it's called The Either Side of Midnight. And that's a kind of a family drama and a contemporary kind of thriller. Really good, really full of great insights. I loved that. I'm going to read Jane Harper's The Survivors, if I can whip it away from my mother, who took it first. So she's reading that at the moment. So, I loved a beautiful book called The Lost Love Song by Minnie Dark, who wrote a book called Star-Crossed as well. That was a gorgeous one. I loved a book called The Application of Pressure, which follows 2 paramedics through their career, from starting as young paramedics, and then through 20 years and each chapter is them responding to a different emergency. So if you've ever been that person watching an ambulance race by and I wonder what they're going to see, that's what happens in this book. And it's by an Adelaide author called Rachel Mead. So it's Rachel, Rachael, Mead, MEAD. And I loved that because I got to know those 2 paramedics, and each chapter, as I said, responds to a different call out for them. So you get to meet all these, and it's pretty gory at times, I have to say, but gee, it was interesting. And I finished with just one other one. Anna Goldsworthy who's a fantastic musician, but also a really elegant novelist, and she wrote a beautiful book called Melting Moments, which is a really quiet study of a South Australian woman through her life. So you meet her as a young woman, you meet her throughout her life. And it's just full of really gentle observations about the choices that we make, and in marriage and family and parenthood. And I love that as well. So there's just a few anyway, but ones I loved. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we've got time for you to answer some questions.
I'd love to. Absolutely, please.
Okay. Well, we've got a question here by Maggie. And she says, please, with lots of E's in the end, say you have a book idea with Sullivan as the lead.
Oh, Maggie, I do. I really do. And only for 2 reasons. One is because, as I said earlier, I wrote like 50,000 extra words with Sullivan. And then I have also been so bowled over by, this book is about Eliza and her big emotional journey. And poor Eliza, everybody's just running to me going, Sullivan, Sullivan, Sullivan. So I absolutely will. I had an idea for Sullivan. I want to find out what happens to Sullivan next and write a book with an 11-year-old boy, 12-year-old boy as the lead character. So absolutely. The book I was going to write next is not the Sullivan book. And I don't know whether this might be how the pandemic turns me upside down, that I will leave that book for another time and write about Sullivan next. But Maggie, I will, I promise.
Well, even, with your children's lines, he might even be able to feature there.
How funny. I could have him visit the Caravan park where all the other characters are.
You can sort
Janine, that's a genius idea. Thank you very much.
There you go.
Wouldn't that be really strange if I start mixing up all the characters start popping into each other's books and things? Because I have a character called Lola Quinlan, who's like an 85-year-old Irish grandmother, and I love her, and she's so much fun to write. And she's just so irreverent and fun, and I can't let go of her. And I've written 3 books and a short story. And actually, Penguin, my publishers asked me in March and April in lockdown, and they asked a number of their authors would you like to write about? Choose one of your characters and what they'd be doing during coronavirus. So I wrote about Lola and really loved writing. It's just a short little 500-word piece. But if anybody would like to read that piece about Lola, if you've enjoyed my character Lola Quinlan in other books, just send me a message on Facebook on my page. It's just Monica McInerney, and I'll send you the link to that short story if you'd like to read it. But yeah, I love going back to other characters.
Now, Alicia has asked, first of all, she said that she agreed his story seems like it wasn't finished.
And there's lots. He's only 11. He's got a whole lifetime ahead of him for sure. Yeah.
And then she's asked, how does your writing process work from idea through to finished book?
It's really just sitting hours and hours and hours, Alicia, in my attic in Dublin, in my office, and turning up to my desk every single day and asking myself, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if this character did this? What if this other character reacted like that? You build it slowly. Like if I was a composer and we were here talking about like an opera I'd written or a musical or something, and I would say it's one note following another note following another note. And that's how I write. I write a scene, and then that leads me to another scene and to another, and turning up to my desk every single day for a year, 18 months, that story builds and builds and builds. So it's a very slow process. I've worked out that in the 20 years I've been published, I probably have spent about 15 years sitting alone in a room with a computer and a notebook. But I wouldn't have it any other way, because when I'm out, I'm running around and meeting real people. But it's, as I said earlier when you asked for my tips, Janine, the way to be a writer is to write and read and edit. So
now, Pam is asking, you talked about family secrets. How important is the truth? Should some secrets not be revealed?
Absolutely, they should not be revealed sometimes, Pam. And thanks, it's a great question. And that's the big burning question at the heart of the Godmothers, that there's a lot of secrets that have been kept from all sorts of people, not just Eliza, as the story unfolds and you discover that there's lots going on that people haven't shared with other people. And I wanted to ask that real moral dilemma. Is it sometimes better not to know the truth? Because people keep secrets for all sorts of very interesting reasons, for the power of it sometimes. Sometimes it's because they're very worried the impact it will have on people if the truth is known. And as a novelist, I love that grey area morally. It's this book, as I said, it's a book of moral dilemmas. Should you keep quiet sometimes and spare people from damage? You might hurt them in some ways, but maybe you would hurt them more. So it changes with every scenario.
Yeah. Now, Chenza has asked, what authors do you like to read? Like, have you got go-to authors that you would definitely read?
Oh yeah, I've got dozens and dozens of authors that I read. I love Roald Dahl. I've read all of Roald Dahl's books as a child, and also his adult novels. I love Tim Winton's books. I love Maeve Binchy, the Australian writer. I love the Irish writer Maeve Binchy. Apologies there. I love the UK writer Rosamund Pilcher, who wrote big, warm family stories. I've learned a lot about writing from reading her. I love the kids writers, Paul Jennings, the Australian writer, Margaret Mahy in New Zealand. I read everything that she ever wrote. Jane Harper's books I really love. I really enjoyed Trent Dalton's books. And looking forward to reading his new one. Yeah, sorry, I could just reel off names forever. Yeah. Everything. I read thrillers, I read literary fiction. I've been reading a lot of classics. I read Kate Grenville's new book. I love historical fiction too, and a lot of contemporary fiction as well. So, yeah, so many favourite authors.
Yeah. Now, Maggie is asking, what sort of book would you love to write if you could write any kind of book or any topic, fiction or non-fiction? And would you feel you'd need to use a pen name if it were different from your usual genre? A bit like J.K. Rowling, I suppose.
Wow, Maggie, what a good question. Well, I think my secret thing was that I did want to write a children's book series. That was always something I really wanted to do. And and now I'm doing it, I guess. And initially I was going to publish that under my full name, which is Monica Mary McInerney, and then decided not to, just to stay as Monica McInerney. But yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm 55. I hopefully, you know, God willing, I've got another 25, 30 years of writing ahead of me. Writers don't retire, as far as I can make out. We can't, because our imaginations just keep going. And I wouldn't be surprised if I try, you know, different genres. I read a lot of thrillers. I read a lot of crime novels. Perhaps I might try something like that. But for the time being, I'm still finding the whole world of family drama and family comedy drama so rich in ideas. And as I said, each book, you know, gives me an idea for the next one. Like, as I said, you know, I might end up not writing the one I thought I was going to write and write a book about Sullivan instead. So that'll keep me busy for the time being, I reckon. So.
Good. Now, Alicia is asking, how do you choose the names of your characters and side characters?
Great question. Eliza, in this book, I was out for lunch with my mum a couple of years ago, actually, and I had the idea of the book, and I said to mum, what's one of, you know, give me a name. So I always felt like it was a gift from my mum. And she said, I really like the name Eliza. And I chose that. And mum's middle name is Elizabeth, actually, too. So I thought, that's lovely. So sometimes it's that. I go to cemeteries. I do like a good little stroll around a cemetery to get names, and fantastic for that. When I'm choosing side characters, sometimes watching the credits at the end of TV series is fantastic for names whizzing past you. Yeah, that's really good. I spend a lot of time getting the names right, and sometimes I find that the characters have got the wrong names. For example, I don't think I've actually said this publicly before, actually, but when I was writing The Godmothers, Olivia and Maxie, when I started writing them, they were the other way around. Olivia was the TV actress, right, and Maxie was the art curator who now runs this boutique hotel in Edinburgh. And it wasn't sitting right. I was kind of writing their scenes and I was writing their dialogue, and I thought, it's just not working, but I love those two names. So I switched them. I came up the attic stairs the next day and thought, I wonder. And Maxie became the TV actress and Olivia became the one. And I thought, now they've got their right names. So, and that's really happens. Sullivan, for example, I just loved the name Sullivan. I met somebody called Sullivan about 8 years ago, and I've just been waiting to use that somewhere. So I store them up.
It's not a
Pardon?
Name.
No, it's not at all. And also I needed a name because Sullivan and Eliza play online Scrabble, and Sullivan has fun with his name. He calls himself Backwards is his online game, his online gaming name. So that's always really, you know, so that was fun. So Sullivan Backwards is Navilis, which worked out really well too. Because, you know, as a kid, we used to, like, my name backwards is Achinom Genrenicum. So we always, as kids, we'd play with our names back to front. So that was good. But yeah, I get them from all sorts of places. I have to say book tours are fantastic because I love to meet readers after my talk, and I sign copies, and I write down everybody's names, and I gather a lot of great names on book tours from readers. Yeah, so that's always like a little secret that I've borrowed a reader's name for a book too.
Now, last question. Cheryl has asked, Eliza was a beautiful character. We need a sequel to see how things go with Lawrence.
Spoilers. Thank you. Yes, I loved writing her too, and I think possibly down the track, if I do write about Sullivan, then Eliza will appear in that, because I think Eliza and Sullivan are going to be really close friends for their lives. Sorry to leap out of my skin on a spoiler alert there, but I'm sorry, Cheryl, I gave myself a fright. And I nearly tipped backwards, actually. But thank you. I cared about her so much, and I think she's going to be fine. I think she has. I think the world awaits her. But yeah, if I wrote about Sullivan, she's going to be there too, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, Monica, we've come towards the end of our lovely event. Can you tell the readers how you can connect with them online?
Yes, and please do. Perhaps some of you are already on my Facebook page, and if you had a question and didn't get a chance, we ran out of time to answer, please do drop me a message on my Facebook page. It's me that does it. It comes directly to me, and it's me that writes back to everybody. So on Facebook and also on Instagram, and as I said, it's a big, happy, safe reading community. I do lots of giveaways of my books, and as I said, I'll be doing giveaways of Carnation occasionally Rose souvenirs. I recommend books all the time. I talk to other authors on my page, and so yeah, I love it. If people would like to join on my Facebook page, that'd be great.
Oh, that's terrific. Well, I'll just finish up with letting everyone know that all of your books are available to borrow at the library in every format. We've got paperbacks, we've got ebooks, e-audio books, and audio books. And if you haven't done so already, please hop on and reserve them. And we've even got the Godmothers as an e-audio book that's available as well.
Oh, fantastic.
It's out on loan, of course.
Oh, lovely. Well, can I just have, we've got time for me to say a secret thing about the audiobook. Please don't turn it off at the end of the acknowledgements, which might be when you normally, because they've done a beautiful job. I've had snippets of the three narrators have done it, three great Australian actresses have done the narration for the Godmothers. But because I was in Australia and we were able to set up a studio link between my sister's house in Adelaide and the Sydney studio, I'm on the audiobook as well. They got me to write an audio essay, so I read it out. So you hear, you're probably all sick of my voice by the end of tonight, but if you've got the audiobook, I'm a little surprised at the end of the audiobook, me talking about the writing of the book. And that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been here because of COVID. So there's another silver lining. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and chatting to me tonight. It's been absolutely fantastic. We've been going for over an hour, which is more than what we did
sorry, everybody. God, you need your dinner and a glass of wine and relax on a Friday night.
Yeah, and look, I wish you all the best with the Godmothers, and we look forward to seeing what's coming in the future. How long do we have to wait, do you think, to get another?
Well, the children's book's coming in April next year, but I need to sort of just lock away in the attic and follow my own advice and just read, write and edit for about a year, I reckon. So maybe about 18 months off. But hopefully people will happily, maybe reread my earlier ones, or there's a lot of beautiful Australian writers out there for people to read. So, Janine, thank you so much for your gorgeous questions. And everybody, thanks so much for giving up your Friday night just to talk books and writing. And if you read my books, thank you so much. I love that I get to do this. I've been doing this for 20 years and I couldn't do it if I didn't have readers like all of you. So thank you all very much. And Courtney for the technological support too.
That's great. Thanks, Monica.
Thanks. Good night, everybody.